Welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the executive meeting dated Monday, October 24th, 2022. We are meeting on the traditional Treaty Territory 6, and the land and the home of the Métis and Dakota. I'd call this meeting to order. We'll start with the approval of the agenda. Go ahead, Councillor Miller.
So moved, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. The vote is now open. Councillor Lennox up.
In favor.
Thank you. I'm waiting for one. Thank you. Next item is declaration of conflict of interest. Are there any conflict of interest?
Tara Lennox up here.
And what is your conflict of interest?
I declare conflict of interest on item 5.1, and as my spouse is employed by QP National and represents a party on this item.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder to fill in the correct paperwork as soon as possible following the meeting. Next item, adoption of the minutes from the October 3rd, 2020 Executive Committee meeting. Mayor Dion.
I'll move them.
Thank you. Is now open. Councillor Lennox up.
In favor.
Thank you. We're still waiting for one. There it is. Thank you very much. It's carried. Item 5, delegations. Item 5.1. At this moment, we'll have Councillor Lennox up close.
Thank you. I'll close.
Thank you. Item 5.1, request for clarification from the Prince Albert Golf and Curling Center, purchase of hole 8, concession shack, a verbal presentation by Mel Kelly. If you wouldn't mind going to the welcome. Yeah, I got it first. Thanks. There you are. Thank you very much for coming. Go ahead.
Your Worship, Mayor Dion, Deputy Mayor Kilmer, and the rest of councillors and mid-staff, thanks for the opportunity. I'd like to acknowledge as well, we have a great relationship with Prince Albert Golf and Curling Club in the city of Prince Albert, and a special with community service and Jody and his team. Today we're here again. We were back in the spring. We came down and we chatted about the hole 8 concessions, which has been closed, I think, since 2017. We've had a proposal, an agreement. In August this year, we got a letter from the union, and so we're here today to get some clarification on where that should be and where it is. We have no intent to challenge the union. We have no intent to be unionized, and so we're just wondering what the city and where the city is and where we should be going with this. So we are kind of here to help answer some questions and clarification. Darcy Myers, our GM's here as well. We did have the shack open. We didn't run it very much in September at all. In fact, hardly, I don't know if we did run it in September after the letter. We have not been in correspondence with the union. We've left that kind of back here, and we're after this meeting see where we go. And basically, part of that reason wasn't just union. Part of it is also once our staff leave at school staff and that sort of thing, we were short of staff for September. So we had the card out there. We kept it rolling that way. So we're kind of open, Darcy here as well, to help answer questions. So we're just a little confused. We left here thinking everything was good.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for the speakers? Mayor Dion.
Well, I'd like to apologize. You know, we don't control our union. You know, they'll tell us with one hand one thing and tell us something else with the other. So we do apologize. I am going to make a recommendation that this gets referred back. I'll move the recommendation to Community Services to deal with the union, and then we'll get back to you, because we don't expect you people that are volunteers and run that organization for us to get involved with this, because it can get a little dicey with the agreements and everything else, and we're pretty good experts on it. So I'll make that recommendation, and our apologies, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can on the results.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor Dion. Councillor Head,
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't have any questions for our speakers, but I do have a question for administration.
can you hold the questions
Yep.
until following the speakers? Anyone else have any questions for the speaker? No? Thank you very much for coming and sharing your concern.
Thank you.
Councillor Head.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I know we had voted on this earlier in the spring, and the report, as I recall it, had indicated that there was consultation with our unions. But to the city solicitor, I guess, is there some successorship rights for this workplace to the union 882?
Just one second. Solicitor, would you mind pressing your, thank you very much. Ooh. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Head. I would like to avoid providing legal advice, in an open forum. However, I will attempt to answer your question in this context. I do understand that the correspondence that has been sent to the Prince Albert to the Prince Albert Golf and Curling Club does claim succession rights, and that there is an allegation advanced by the union in this case that this amounts to succession rights. In terms of the circumstances of which I'm aware, this has not been an active enterprise or business activity of the City of Prince Albert for a number of years. The asset itself was sold to the Prince Albert Grand Council pursuant to the council resolution under a bill of sale, and that the Prince Albert Golf and Curling Club now operates, or did operate over the summer, under their existing contract to sell concessions on the golf course. Also a contract that was approved by the majority of this council without any prior indication of QP objection, prior to that time. So in terms of the elements of which I'm aware, without providing a legal opinion to an open forum, those are the relevant considerations that I would put to you with respect to whether or not there are succession rights.
Thank you. Just for clarification, in your explanation, you talked about perhaps incorrectly the Grand Council, and you meant Golf and Curling.
Sorry, I said Prince Albert Golf and Curling Club.
Thank you.
I was getting the
Thank you.
acronyms.
I just wanted to.
Yes,
Yeah, I
thanks,
just
yeah.
wanted to make sure
Yeah,
people.
yeah, Golf and Curling Club.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grodnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. That's kind of my question too, is that, help me understand that when, and I guess to the city solicitor or city manager, when we sell a property such as that shack or the Margot Fournier Center, for example, those both were unionized places. So does that contract then follow the building, or does it follow the city and stay with the city? That's my question. I'd like to know that, or is there an answer to that?
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Ogrodnik. Again, the claim of succession rights is typically involves a business that is unionized, where the business in its substantial portion of its undertaking is sold to another entity. In that situation, the law is that there are succession rights that the union has with the subsequent employer. But typically, that's not a situation that involves a single activity that has not been engaged in for a number of years, an activity that involves the sale of an asset that's no longer utilized or part of the enterprise of the City of Prince Albert in their operations, or that is operated under a pre-existing contract already. So there are a number of factors that would suggest this isn't a succession issue. However, the QP 882 is alleging that the circumstances suggest otherwise. So there's a difference of opinion and a dispute there that is ensuing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Was this letter that was sent to the Golf Association, was that filtered, was that copied to the city at all? Or was it just straight to them? Do we know if we received a copy at the same time?
Who's able to? Did you receive? City Clerk? This.
I'm
Go
not
ahead.
too sure at the moment. I'd have to double check how it was received and who was received on that.
So your question is,
Well, if
had the
we,
city received?
a copy of this at the same time that the Prince Albert Golf and Curling Club did,
Okay,
that's concerning to me.
because, so your question is, did we receive the letter via
Yes.
the Golf and Curling Club? Not
No,
from,
via the union.
via the
is
union?
my
That is your
question.
question? Okay. She,
So.
oh, go
I
go
can-
ahead.
So if you look at the attachment to the Prince Albert Golf and Curling Club correspondence that we received that was addressed to the city clerk, the attachment is what I believe they received, which is an email on August 18th. It shows it's to the Prince Albert Golf and Curling Club from Mr. Thibault, and it was carbon copied to, I believe that's the president of the QP 882. So other than that, I don't see that it went anywhere else. So we did not receive a copy of that. I believe it just went to the Prince Albert Golf and Curling
Is
Club.
that a standard practice, or is this something that was a mistake? It seems to me that we should have been, at the same time, or even prior, talked to about this. And it's really disappointing that we didn't get a copy of it. And I'm just, it concerns me a lot if this is the type of practice that's occurring.
Okay. Are there any?
And it shouldn't have happened. I mean, in my opinion, we should have known about it prior or had a conversation about it. And again, I share in the apologies that the mayor sent is the Golf and Curling Club shouldn't have had to deal with this. The deal was made, and then later on, they received that letter, and it's very disappointing that this occurred. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other? We have a motion on the floor. We'll move to a vote. The vote is now open. The vote is carried. Thank you, and thank you very much to the Golf and Curling Club. Okay, next is the consent agenda, and a reminder that the consent agenda is the part of the agenda where items are placed that can all be approved at once. Is there anyone that wants to remove any, to discuss any of the items? Councillor Edwards,
6.2, please.
thank you. Councillor Head.
Sorry, thank you, Deputy Mayor. 6.3 and 6.5.
Mayor Dion.
I was 6.32.
Okay. Any others? Counselor Miller? Oh, sorry.
I'll receive and file the rest.
Thank you very much. There's a motion on the floor. The vote is now open. Counselor Lennox Zepp,
In favor.
thank you. Waiting on one. Thank you very much. Vote carries. Item 6.2, update on the mustard seed and emergency shelter and support center. Counselor Edwards. Go ahead, Counselor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just some concerns, I guess, over some of the wording in some of the correspondence we received. So one of them was from Taylor. I'm not going to attempt the last name, but it talked about council, or somewhere in the correspondence, maybe it's not directly in front of me, I don't have it highlighted, but that council rejected their proposal in September. But I don't remember us actually getting to the table and even having a vote. Is that correct? Did we vote or not vote on the September discussions in this letter?
Director, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Edwards, for the question. Essentially, the last decision made of council was to refer the proposal to administration. My understanding was that you weren't in a position to make a formal decision until proper consultation had taken place. So after that referral, consultation did move ahead, and after discussions with Mustard Seed, specifically the writer of this letter, that is when they formalized the challenges that they had and their inability to move ahead with this proposal. So no, there was not any formal denial of any development permit or anything similar.
Yeah, just for public's sake, we didn't vote on the second proposal whatsoever. And people need to know that. It wasn't the city council that shot them down. And the letter is a little misleading, in my opinion. That's a bit of a concern. And another bit of a concern is I welcome the organization myself. I think that, they've shown good potential in some of their proposals, but it's unfortunate that we fire up the community saying we're coming, but there was really no funding in place. And all the support letters and everything were a little misleading to those people because the funding wasn't in place. And to me, it looks bad. And here we are trying to welcome an organization in, and they weren't prepared to move forward with any of the locations that they bid on. And we discussed at length about them. And I just think that the procedure needs to be a little different on that. If they're looking at buildings and they want to engage in conversation, more measures need to be in place prior to coming forward, in my opinion. It's just a little disappointing on that aspect of things, because it's something that we need, and it toys with some emotions in the community. And I get the disappointment, but we never had some of the opportunity to talk about that. That's it for now. I have one more statement afterwards, but.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Edwards. Counselor Grodnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I have similar concerns of Councillor Edwards. I specifically asked in their presentation, funding, are you asking the city to fund it, or are you asking, and from my understanding, I heard that they're getting provincial government funding. And I understand now that that's why this shelter's not opening right now at this time, because they did not secure that funding from the province. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for the question. Yes, a collection of factors. They simply did not have proper permits in place by the winter season, and they have renovations and things like that would have had to occur. But yes, funding was also certainly an issue, and that was a front and center issue when I spoke to the Mustard Seed.
And our role is zoning, basically, and approving a discretionary development permit. That's our role, that's what I understood is what we were going to play. When we met, and, it was hard to ask questions when we met privately with them. I found it somewhat frustrating, because every time I tried to ask a question, I got cut off, and something else was being said. So it was a little bit on the frustrating side. So I'm supportive of the concept, of the idea, of course, we all are. But I don't think we should shoulder the blame for this shelter not opening. And that's what I got from calls that I got and emails that I got, is that I'm somehow blocking this shelter from opening. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We're not blocking it. We just want to make sure that a shelter opens, that it's going to be funded. And the taxpayers of Prince Albert, we have no place in our budget to operate, $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 shelter. We don't have that currently in our budget. And as we go through the budget process, we'll see what we can and cannot do. And so the public needs to know that we did not stop this shelter from opening. It was a lack of funding from the source where it should come from, which is the provincial government. It should be funding these shelters. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification, Councillor Ogrodnik, when you talk about us meeting with them privately, that was not as a council as a whole. That was where they contact individual people in the city and discussed. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. They contacted the Mustard Seed organization, and their person in Prince Albert, can't remember her name offhand, contacted us. I met with them at the Bison Cafe just to discuss prior to them coming to council. They wanted to tell us all about their organization and if we had any questions, and that's where we met privately with them prior to council, so that we got a feel for the organization. Great organization. Support the concept of the organization. I don't support the idea of, and never will, making money off of homelessness. I don't believe that anybody should be doing that. People should be paid, there's no doubt about it, but there shouldn't be profits being made off of homelessness or off of poverty or any of those social issues that we have in our community. And so that's what I wanted to say. So
Thank you very much, Councillor.
thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just with regards to the letter from the downtown, or from the downtown bid, it's a very interesting letter. And it's something that we need to take seriously and really consider of where shelter should go in the community, because it does impact businesses. And businesses are key to our community. And so I hope people don't feel hurt by the downtown not wanting them in the area, or not wanting these shelters in the area, because it's their livelihood. And the community is concerned about the homeless the homeless issues in PA. Not only in PA, we know it's not only in PA, but this is who we take care of. It's most people are talking about the homelessness concerns in our city, and it's something that we need to have a good hard look at of where it should go. Do we need a shelter? Yes, we certainly need a shelter. How big a shelter? I think the mayor's proposal the other day is a good proposal. Maybe get to where we are, or where we need to be. The reality is I'm also hearing voices of saying, the more homeless shelters we have, the more people that will come, and we'll fill those, and then we're going to need more. That's concerning to me as well. The cities are becoming the hub from communities wherever some of the people are not able to exist and find services they need, they come to the cities. And the cities we're the third largest city in the province, and we're impacted by it. And it's really serious. And people in our community are talking about it. And not only the location, but Some people are actually mentioning about relocation. How do we move some of the people that have come into our community and don't have any fixed address? How do we work with the people that are struggling and are living on our streets? What's the possibility of relocating them? And I'm assuming there's some legalities behind that, and maybe I'll ask the city solicitor in that. If they don't have a fixed address, what can be done? Because this weekend I was asked that by 3 different families. And wasn't a racial thing. Two of the families were Indigenous this weekend that said, a lot of the homeless, a lot of the people that are coming up to our windows and knocking on our car windows when we're getting ready to go shopping they're scaring some of the shoppers. And that's a reality, and that's unfortunate. But that's what people are asking. What can we do as a city? And I don't think the city has much control over that aspect of things, but maybe I'll ask the city solicitor about that.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Edwards. No, there's not much that the City of Prince Albert can do. There's no requirement that people within our community have to be of a fixed address, and there's nothing that can be done if there's no law broken. If there's a law broken, of course, they are accountable to the police services and the justice system for that conduct. But absent any such conduct, there's no requirement that people within our municipal boundaries have a fixed abode.
Yeah, exactly. The city can't just order a relocation. And I've been trying to explain this to multiple residents that it's just not something that can occur. Sure, some of the agencies can work with the people and work with the communities and say, you know what, you have a home, you have a place to live in this community, but we can't do that. And I just, for public sake, I wanted to make sure that was clear, because it is in some people's minds, and a lot of people are saying it everywhere, and it's not something that we can do as a city. It's just not out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ogrodnik.
Thank you. Just one more quick comment. I think to answer Councillor Edwards' question here, one program that's really working in our city is by the YWCA and Homeward Bound. I have 2 apartment buildings on Brannion Drive in my ward that are Homeward Bound. And what they do is not only try to get them a fixed address as well as many, many other things, but those 2 buildings are the 2 apartments in a long line of apartments across from 2 elementary schools that are run, and there's standards and there's rules, etc., that take place, whereas the other ones are sometimes very chaotic, what goes on in those buildings. And so when the residents of the area found out Homeward Bound was there, they were upset until they learned what actually happens. They have a community association where the people that were previously homeless are now making decisions of how these buildings are to operate. That's a success story, in my opinion. And then eventually, once they deal with whatever issues the resident has, then they're moved into apartment buildings in other parts of the city and become, successful members of society. And that's a success program, and that's what we need. But we need to have clients that want to go into those buildings and get the help and the care that they need or that they're lacking, and learning responsibility, et cetera. So it's a very successful program, and that's what we need to, as a city, support Homeward Bound. It's in my ward. As I said, I have no problem. I support it 100%. Whenever I get a call, I say, no, this is a good, you're talking about the other buildings that are chaotic, that are causing problems in the neighborhood, not the Homeward Bound buildings. So
Thank you.
kudos to the YWCA for that.
Thank you very much. There is not a motion on the floor. Would someone care to?
Well, do you want to?
Thank you very much.
You pulled it. I'll make the motion then.
Thank you very
to
much.
receive and
With the
file.
motion on the floor, we are ready to vote? The vote is now open. Counselor Lennox Zepp,
In favor.
thank you. Vote carries. Next item that was pulled in the consent agenda was item number 6.3, request for permit, YWCA cold shelter, or cold weather shelter, sorry. Counselor Head, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I will move the recommendation. I do want to say and echo some of the comments from my fellow councilors. You know, this is definitely needed in our city, and I commend the YWCA for doing this once again this year. I just want to note in the report that there is 422 unique individuals coming through the shelter from November to May or April last year, and I see that they're proposing to open up the shelter from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. as well, or 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., sorry. I also have a question for the director about the daytime shelter that we have as well. So I am moving this recommendation,
And
much needed in our city.
okay, Director, if you wouldn't mind pressing your button so we can, thank you very much.
Just a question about the daytime shelter operated on 8th Street, First Avenue East.
Go
If
ahead.
they will be operating. Pardon me? Moose Lodge, yes.
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Head. You know what, I'm not in a position to answer that. I'd have to confirm and get back to members of council. Perhaps, I know there are members of the proposed shelter in the audience, perhaps they could help you out, but I'd have to get back to you for certain response.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Dion.
Well, I'm a little concerned, why I wanted to pull it, I'm a little concerned about the motion, so I'm going to ask the director this question. Their intention is to open November 1st, and when, I think our next council meeting is after that, do you need us to call a special meeting or do something, or can we approve it here to allow them to go ahead? You know, I don't want to delay the opening of the shelter.
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor, for the question. If the motion up on the board is approved today, I am comfortable moving forward on November 1st. I'll finalize the proper permit and get that to you on the 7th, but like I said, with what's on the board today, I'm comfortable with moving forward.
Okay, because I just don't want to delay them opening. As you can see what color is outside, even though they claim it's going to go away, that's a good guess. We'll say 50-10, it's going to go away like the weather says. Okay, that's just my insurance. I just wanted to pull it to make sure that we weren't going to delay them, and I want to thank them for helping us in this situation, because they are, as we try to find a permanent solution. So thanks to all the organizations.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Very quickly, I just want to thank Donna Brooks from the YWCA and Brian Howell of the Riverbank Development Corporation, along with Jeff Despens from PAGC, who are continually meeting on a regular basis and staying in touch with the city, attempting to find solutions to our homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to express the gratitude to those same individuals, and in one of the reports that I've read somewhere, recognize that the fundraising for that is well over $400,000. And so if anybody in our community has any ideas or want to do any fundraising to help those individuals, that would be much appreciated. So with that, the vote is going to be open. The vote is now open. Councillor Lennox Zepp.
In favor.
Thank you. The vote carries. Next item is item 6.5, September 2022, update status on capital projects. Councillor Head.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. A couple questions I have. And I know the report says that some of the billing isn't done yet, and I guess that's why on be page 78 of our agenda, Car Place is showing a $600 bill. I'm guessing that it's just not finalized yet. So that's the first question. And then I have questions for the director about some of our external funding at our airport. I see in the report that it's listing that funding is not approved. Do we have any timeline, if at all, that it'll be approved, if that work will be done? Because it did seem like we'd be expanding on some of our services at the airport, and I see in this report that that funding has not been approved. So question to the director.
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you. So to answer your first question in regards to the paving program, yes, it's related to invoices. Invoices can take a long time to be processed, checked, and then paid, especially in the paving and the concrete, because you have to do unit price surveying of each of the roads, how much asphalt was put down, how much concrete was put down. So, yeah, there'll be new numbers in the coming months, but we usually don't have everything finalized until December on both of those programs.
Thought so. Thank you.
And the second question was related to the airport. What page was that?
Page 83 of the report, 82 of the report, just highlighting that that it wasn't, funding wasn't granted, I guess. Any timeline on whether or not we would be?
I'm just looking to find that page number here.
It's the rehabilitation and expansion design. Utilities design. Apron 2 rehabilitation expansion.
I'm just the copy I'm looking at here doesn't have the page numbers.
Sorry, 2 or 3 of that report, then I guess is what also is indicated on the documents.
Airport funding. So which
Well, it
item?
says no construction funding approved, no construction funding approved. Just wondering, if we will be getting funding. No, there's no external funding for this project. Projects reviewed by our Port Advisory Committee. Project will not be proceeding.
So each year, we always apply for the CAP program, which is the provincial program, and the ACAP, which is the federal program, in every category that we possibly can. We don't always get approved. We've had very good success the last couple of years. Last year, I think we brought in almost $5 million. This project here, according to their funding categories, is very, very low priority. So it's not likely that we'll see it in the near future, but we always make an attempt to try to get that funding. But yeah, it's probably got a low chance.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director.
And I'll move that.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll open the vote. The vote is now open. Maybe not. Now it is. Councillor Lennox up.
In favor.
Thank you very much. And it carries. We're moving on to the reports of administration and committees. 7.1, Barton Drive Traffic Calming Update, a PowerPoint presentation by the Transportation and Traffic Manager, Evan Hastings. We are just going to wait for the PowerPoint.
No problem. Sorry. All right, good
Go ahead.
afternoon, everyone. This report is regarding traffic calming on Barton Drive. So to give a little bit of background about how we got here today, in 2020 and 2021, a resident reported several speeding concerns on Barton Drive, and they were documented. So to follow up, the Department of Public Works and the Prince Albert Police Service did 3 separate speed studies. These studies resulted in 85th percentile speeds of 42 to 44 kilometers per hour. So to give a reminder to those people who don't know what the 85th percentile speed is, it's the speed at which 85% of vehicles travel below and 15% of vehicles travel above. So at this time, the 44 kilometer per hour speed did not meet the City of Prince Albert traffic calming policy, so a traffic calming measure was not warranted. On July 18th Executive Committee meeting, 84% of residents, a petition was submitted with approval from 84% of residents to install a temporary traffic calming measure on Barton Drive. So to give a little bit of insight into the traffic study, the 85th percentile speed was 44 kilometers per hour. 2.7% of all vehicles were found to be going 50 kilometers per hour or greater, and 0.017% of vehicles were found to be going 70 kilometers or greater. So that's 6 out of approximately 35,000 vehicles. As we can see below, most of them happened, at the late hours of the night. So although the current location does not meet the City of Prince Albert traffic calming policy, we do see a large concern from the residents, and we want to address that. So the recommendation is to perform a temporary traffic calming trial for next summer. So that would be from May to October 2023. This allows the Department of Public Works to monitor the success of the traffic calming measure to see if it should be installed permanently. It also allows time for the residents to determine the effectiveness of the measure and if they like it in their community. The study will be based on traffic statistics, consultation with the neighborhood, and with emergency services. So I did bring a time frame of the recommendation, and that would be, so again, from May to October 2023 to install the temporary traffic calming measure with the speed monitoring signs. And in September 2023, the Department of Public Works will work with the Department of Communications to put out a community poll or survey that'll allow us to get feedback from the residents to see if they, support the traffic calming measure or if they would like a different option. In December 2023, a report will be brought to council, including community consultation, emergency services consultation, and relevant traffic statistics. So the first option is a temporary speed cushion, which we don't have in Prince Albert currently, but one was installed on Vic Boulevard in Saskatoon earlier in 2022. So works very similar to a speed hump. However, there's strategically placed gaps for emergency service vehicles to be able to drive through while maintaining speed, so it doesn't increase emergency response time, as we can see here. So it's noteworthy that a fire truck does have a wider wheel path than a standard vehicle, so they're able to proceed. And this is what the temporary measure would look like. So the speed cushion would cost approximately $4,500, and it acts to return traffic speeds to the design speed of the road. And it has minimal impact to emergency response time and minimal reduction of on-street parking. I was able to consult the City of Saskatoon, and it has had the desirable effects so far in 2022. The second option is a temporary speed hump, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. The installation of the speed hump would cost approximately $4,000, and the only negative effect of it is it would increase emergency response time by 15 to 20 seconds, and that was with consultation with the fire department here. Also, both measures can increase noise pollution where they are installed, and both have minimal reduction to on-street parking. So I'd like to thank you at this time, and I can accept any questions.
Thank you. Mayor Dion.
So mine is both to you and to the fire chief, okay? How come Saskatoon's got so many? Yeah. Like, they're just trying this first one?
Yeah, so
They have 400 or 500 of them. So they just don't have 1 or 2. So I'm shocked at the fire department's response, because I would have talked to the Saskatoon Fire Department, because they probably have the most traffic calming devices, and 4 or 5 different kinds, right from the big bump to the small bump to the piece that comes out to narrow the street. So are we just looking for a reason not to do it? If that's the case, just say it, that we don't like the idea and we don't support it. because every time I get a report, now this is the first time that I've heard emergency services has a say into it, and it affects the fire truck. So maybe the next fire truck, we have to phone Saskatoon, they have a special suspension that goes over these speed bumps. I don't know, maybe the chief can answer that, holding up 2,500 gallons of water, because this is the first I've heard of any report that now talks about emergency vehicles. Before that, it was the standard and everything else, but now we're focusing on saying no by going to emergency vehicles.
Is there a question for the
Yes.
manager?
So my question is, did you consult with the Saskatoon Fire Department, or did you just talk to our fire department?
I consulted with the Saskatoon Traffic Department and did a site investigation of the device, and they told me that the fire department there has enjoyed the speed cushion so far because it didn't have a reduction in response time for the fire department.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions if there is, okay, go ahead. Councillor
You
Edwards.
could have went prior to me. I have a couple of questions. I do kind of like the recommendation. I didn't realize they were $4,500, I guess. Is that the actual cost of purchasing the speed bump?
Yeah, that would be the cost of purchasing the device and then
Or
getting
the
it here.
device, yeah. Okay, because really, I'm not sure one is going to be very effective, but I guess we'll see for sure. I think that some of the stats that I read in here aren't real great, and the one that I really take note of is the bylaw states that the report, the speed limit is 40K on Barton, but the percentage of the vehicles over the report is calculated at 50 kilometers. So if it's calculated at over the legal limit of 40K, it jumps from 3.1% noted in the report to over 30%. So I get it, I understand it's 40, but, well, somewhere down the road, we feel like there's a leeway of 10 kilometers. That seems to be what the case is. And 10 kilometers in some areas probably would be okay, I think. Barton Drive is, to me, it appears narrower. There's a lot of vehicles parked on Barton Drive, lots. And when we get that speed, and I noticed that none of the high speeds aren't listed on here, but there's vehicles going well over 100 clocked, and that's concerning. I guess that's part of my concern is we kind of utilize some statistics that show there's not really a need, but it also talks about more of one resident complaining and starting all of this, but that's not the case either. It's maybe reported to City Hall, but I've talked to several residents, and we had a few online with us. Not everybody, of course, but it isn't just one person. One person is bringing it to light, for sure. There's no question about it.
So is there a question for the manager?
Just some comments. I asked one
Okay,
question.
thank you. Sorry,
Do you want me to stop?
no. I'm trying to be equitable in my admonishment.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I don't know where I'm going, so I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much. I do have a question for, so these are temporary, meaning they are movable.
Yes.
The issues that are pertaining to Barton Drive are very similar to Southwood Drive, if not more. So in the data that was shared by Councillor Edwards just recently, the 85th percentile on Southwood is, I think, 48, if not higher in the 1 week. So I am just wondering if it's possible to include Southwood and Barton, if the mover of this would include Southwood into this. Go ahead, Councillor Grodnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's more of a comment. I think we should try this as a temporary measure and see how it goes. And then if it works and slows traffic down, and then we have to budget for that and for other areas of the city. But I think we should stick with just one street for this year, for next summer. And I like the option one, which is more expensive by $500, but it does allow for our emergency services to go through there without any delay, which is what I think we want, rather than the bump. So I thank you for this report, and it does give us a couple options, and maybe the stats aren't all there, but at least it's an attempt to solve a problem in a residential area where we've had a lot of concern given to us, and so I think this is a step in the right direction. So I will support this motion.
Mayor Dion.
I'm just going to give everyone a heads up, okay? You just heard it, Barton, Southwood. So someone's going to have to move to put $100,000 into the budget for these speed bumps, because I'll tell you, we got 2 fighting already and we haven't started. And I'm still not convinced that this is the answer in a residential that's 40. And I support speed bumps, so, but I support them in the right location. And I don't think that's the location. And that speed bump has to be on Barton in that spot, so when the fire truck hits it, they know they're at the fire scene. It's a residential street with houses. How much slower are you gonna get going? You should be going slow down that residential because my kids are still out there playing. And when they see fire trucks and things, they go like this and they freeze. So, but I'm just giving a heads up. I'm not gonna support this at the moment, strictly because I wanna see the wide range of comments we're gonna get on requests to put speed bumps in.
Thank you. Councillor Zurikowski?
Well, I have a question for the manager. Question for the manager, if I may. I need some clarity on the process, if this passes today, the involvement of the city before installation. Could you run that? You kind of mentioned it real quick earlier. Are we done with the consultation? What we're asking for is the installation in May for a trial period. The neighborhood itself created a correspondence / petition that's shared with the city. The city did not initiate or carry out its own conversation with the neighborhood. So I just need some clarity on those pieces, please.
Okay. Well, as number 3 there, we are looking to update the traffic calming policy over the winter to, have a bit better results and better consultation with the community. But as of our current process, we resulted in an answer of no, not to install the traffic calming device. And then when it went to council, it came back as, find some solutions for the community. And I think that was the best solution in this case. So when they did come with the 84%, approval rate, we did look to find solutions that would fit the community in particular.
Yeah, I think if I may pause on that point for a moment, and I'm glad we're going to review the policy. I think at this point, passively going to support this at this point. But I think we need to realize that there's a difference between the city asking a neighborhood what they think about an issue versus me walking up to my neighborhood, knocking on the door and say, hey, sign my petition for me. So I think there's that sort of involvement moving forward that the city needs to be involved in. So I think that's what I've heard, that change is going to be looked at. Okay?
Yeah, so moving forward, there will be initial community consultation with the neighborhood, so we can kind of gauge the aptitude for the community to have a traffic calming measure and to see if the general community supports it.
Sorry, at this specific location or moving forward after installation?
Moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I think that, these people live there. They've lived through this. If it's that much of an issue for them, despite what the data says, let's give it a try. There's other places that I've talked to people, and by the way, I've talked to a couple of folks on that Barton Drive have called me and said, not excited about this, but I'm not going to share my name with anybody because there's a bit of a momentum that's being built up. I've invited them to do that, but we are where we are today. I think that, I guess my thought on that then, moving forward, I think there has to be an option. I read in the report, it sounds like there's some correspondence that's going to go out. I've seen enough correspondence come out from administration to neighborhoods that it would be my hope that the language in that correspondence reflects something as an invitation for neighbors to share their concerns, rather than just saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, and this is when we're doing it. I think we have to explain to people why, how we got here, the bit of a journey, and an invitation to them to contact whom to express concerns, if they still have concerns.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a great idea. And like I said, I will be working with the Department of Communications to making sure that those messages that go out are as clear and concise as possible and convey the right message.
Okay, thank you for that. My final thought, that if we are going to consider Southwood, I think we should also, for traffic calming measures, we should also consider First Avenue West, Fourth Avenue West, Sixth Avenue West at a couple of locations, 28th Street West, Marquis Road, and perhaps 7th Avenue West as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I did have a question. The recommendation for speed cushions, so to allow emergency vehicles. So there's a lot of larger trucks out there right now. Would they fit through here? Because some of the issues have been larger trucks. So is that something that, oh yeah.
The wheel path would fit, in general, larger transit vehicles and then vehicles such as fire trucks and ambulances. So there may be some very large, excessively sized vehicles out there, but for the most part, no.
For the most, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I am supportive of this as a trial. I think it's important. I think it was a good recommendation to try it and see how the community reacts, to see if it slows traffic, and to see where we're gonna go after. I thought there would be some other alternatives other than a speed bump, but we never received those, so thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Dion.
I have a short question. Did you look at this as a local improvement? You're getting solicited by the neighborhood to put this street on our street, not on my street, on your street. So is this something that could qualify as a local improvement?
Well, depending on the effect that it has to the community, we could view it as a improvement or a negative case. So that's why we're gonna be doing consultation coming in November, so we can see if the neighborhood accepts the change or doesn't like the change.
Thank you. So any others? With that, we'll move to the vote. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Where is the abort? Recall. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Councillor Zerkowski.
My apologies. Thank you for your patience. What I don't see there is the consideration for the communication piece. And I think that's a really important piece that we need to ensure occurs. And I'm just taking a look at it one more time, and no. Is it buried in there somewhere, the communication piece? Because what will happen is, we have very good people working for the city, but they are very, very busy, and spring will come around, and the letter will go out 2 days before they're installed. And that's my concern, so I'm looking for a communication piece in there.
Okay, do you see an opportunity of where that could fit, and would the mover be willing to change that? Councillor Edwards.
So you want them to send a letter prior to installation of this saying this is what's happening? Because the community has been consulted.
Yeah, what what I've heard from the manager is there's going to be a communication piece about the installation. I'd be surprised if everybody on Barton knew about this decision here today. And that communication piece about this is what's going forward, this is when, and we wanted to give you time to get ready for it
Yeah, prior to the council meeting is
prior to the installation of,
prior to the installation or prior to the council meeting?
oh no, installation.
Okay,
Yeah.
installation. Yeah, that's
yeah.
fair. We can add a number to communicate.
So the city clerk has been taking the opportunity to add a piece in number 1 and make a change. Would people please take a look at that
As
number 1
outlined in the
and
report. I just want to touch
and
point with the
ask the
manager
mover.
to make sure that that fits within the, you know, the capacity of the department that we can do that.
Yep, and the intent is to send out a letter to at least the local residents, the
Yeah.
people very near the traffic calming measure, just to alert them of what is going to be installed and how long it's going to be installed for.
For sure.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
that is fine with you, Counselor? Okay, with that, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll open the vote. Too far. The vote is now open. Counselor Lennox up.
In favor.
Okay, the vote is now over and the vote carries. Next item is 7.2, City Fleet Asset Management Plan. And then there is a PowerPoint presentation by Robert Snowden, the Fleet Manager. If you would step to the podium and we will wait for the PowerPoint.
Okay, this is a bit of an asset management plan that I brought one a few years ago to council, and this is sort of a refresher on how things are going. Slide 1 here, basically, simple terms, asset management plan is to plan to manage an asset from birth to grave. Plan is to replace or repair without having to scramble to find funds and resources. To provide services and products at the lowest possible cost and impact to the city and taxpayers. Is it changing? There we go. This chart, as you can see, there's 3 lines that intersect. One of them is the value of the piece of equipment, the other's depreciation, and the other's the cost of repairs. The optimum time actually for replacing a piece of equipment or an asset is where those 3 lines intersect. You keep a piece of an asset longer than where those lines intersect, you risk spending a whole bunch of money on the piece of equipment, costing you more money in the long run to replace it because of inflationary costs, as well as having to put more time and money for employees into it to keep it operating. This is a similar chart for fleet, or even say a water line. They all have similar properties. This is a chart that shows us our current value or age of equipment. It's an age profile. So if you notice, 2015, we got quite a bit of equipment, so it's fairly high dollar value. It's tapered off in the last few years, but if you go right back, we still have equipment that is back in the 70s. Well, actually, we have stuff as old as 57 out there still working, like our dredgers for our sewers in the wintertime that you see quite often on 15th. Those are in the 50s, and we have another set that's in the early 70s. Condition report. This was what the report looked like in 2018. As you notice, our poor equipment back then was, which is in the blue, was about 12.18% of the equipment in the fleet, and the fair was 23.65% of the equipment. This is the current chart of the conditions. As you can see, the poor equipment, we've been focusing on really hard at replacing the poorest in the fleet. We're down nearly 10%. But what you have noticed is because we've been focusing so hard on this, that the fair equipment is, we've been putting a lot of money into the fair equipment to bring it up into the average zone. So it shows you that we have a lot of equipment out there that isn't in the greatest of shape yet. Asset replacement. This is 28's chart. This is back when our assets in our fleet are valued at approximately a little over $30 million. We had replacement status that was for overdue was about $8 million worth, and which was 29%. The replacement status that was due was another 13%. So just around 42% of the equipment was either due or overdue for replacement. Whoops, clicked a little hard. In 2022 status, our replacement status for overdue, we have slightly over $10 million. So that has actually gone up, mostly due to inflation, because now our fleet with inflation from 2018 till now has gone up 33% in value. So it is now $40 million to replace. And our replacement due status is a little higher, or is about the same at about just a little over $5 million. This sort of shows you where our assets, how pricing and stuff has increased over the years. If you take a look at the pickup, for example, in 2018, a pickup that would have cost us $28,000, and originally in about 93 cost us $14,000. If you calculate that out, it's just about 2.5% a year. So it was pretty steady for quite a few years. But if you take the last 4 years now, that same pickup in 2018 that we could have purchased for around $28,000 is now going to cost us $52,000. So in the last 4 years, that average increase is 17% a year. So it's, with inflation, our dollar, everything else, it's really going out of whack. And that's just not for pickups. You can take a look at the numbers for the grader, which used to be about 2.5% average, is now up to 11% a year. And wheel loaders, construction equipment, is up approximately 13% a year in the last 4 years, as what it used to be at an average of 2.5%. This is our funding. Back, that was a few years ago, we agreed on 6% a year for increase in the reserve due to the fact that we hadn't had an increase since '07. And you can see that for quite a while there, our expenses and our reserve was not really growing. We had some major expenses here in the last few years. 2023, it's coming up to budget. A lot of equipment that's been delayed and put off has been, in the last 3 years, is slated, well, it was slated 3 years ago. Now it's been bumped up to 2023. So you can see that we'll have a little over $4 million of equipment to replace that we postponed. And with inflation, those prices have gone up substantially since the time they were originally proposed. But this basically shows you with a 6% increase that with the equipment that is planned till 2029 to replace, if inflation stays fairly low, that we should be able to start getting our revenue back to where we need it. This is one of our major expenses for the fleet period. This is fuel. Gives you a good idea from 87 up to 22. We basically doubled in fuel. It's expense beyond our control or fleet's control, but it's basically doubled. So I usually spend about $1 million a year on fuel just for public works and community services. That's not the fire department or police or the golf course or the airport. This year, I'm looking at an easy $2 million. So basically, my expenses on fuel alone have doubled. And this is just one of the other major expenses that is affecting the reserve, where we have to keep a constant increase on fleet revenue. Basically, this is just this whole fleet plan is an exercise to make sure that we do have a plan for the future so that there's no big shocks for the city. They do see what's coming down the line. And without a proactive plan like this, renewal will not be possible and services will be affected in the future. Now this next one, I know there's a lot of talk on alternative fuels. But yeah, for right now, for the technology that's out there, this is a little bit of humor. But if we go to alternative fuels too quick, like electric vehicles, they just aren't ready for us up here yet. Down in the States where it's nice and warm and they function good, yeah, they're good. And hydrogen vehicles, well, they're in experimental phase, but they are something that might work well as well. And any questions before I sign off? I think Brianne had a few little comments first. Okay.
Okay, are there any questions for the fleet manager? Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Brianne.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute, just considering that we're moving into budget and some things that we need to keep in mind, considering what Robert said. So just as a reminder, we are budgeting utilizing the fleet charge. So that is essentially a rate that is charged to your different departments as they use their fleet. That rate's intended to cover those operational maintenance and replacement costs that Robert's been speaking to. So every year we incur those expenses and then transfer a portion of that to the equipment and fleet reserve for future replacement. So if our fleet budget is too low, we could be in a situation where we go over budget in our fleet costs. This could occur because even though we do set a budget rate, we still have a certain level of services that our residents are expecting. If we are over budget in our fleet costs, this means that we don't have any money to save for future replacement in our equipment and fleet reserve, which is not an ideal situation because that reserve is intended to be our planning tool, as Robert has spoke to save for the future replacement of equipment, because we know that those replacements are going to occur in the future.
Thank you. Any questions? Mayor Dion.
My question is to Brianne. What do we have to do as a council in the way of a motion? This totally always confuses me, because when you say fleet reserve, I'm going to buy a truck, so I'm going to put $10 a year in to buy that truck. Simple. That isn't the case. In our case, we put $10 in to buy the truck, but we'll take $3.50 out for the gas it used, the oil change, and the repairs. So as someone that you're asking to put up a hand, so is that 6%? You're saying every year, is that to increase costs of repairs, to increase the equipment? That's why I'm always baffled, because when I look at that fleet, I think, now is that for new equipment, or is there still some money in there for repairs? So I don't understand how we manage the fleet reserve when it's really not a reserve. To me, it's a balance sheet. It's intended to reserve, we put it in, but if we spend too much on repairs, it takes it out of there, and then we might have 5 cents left. So what can we do as a council to move and change how we do business with the fleet so we understand it and we actually get a real figure of the amount of money that we're putting away? Because when we look at 6%, and we did this last budget, we trimmed it, okay? But I am thinking the cost of the equipment to the reserve, what we got, what we need, and then I forget, oh, Greg, you forgot gas, filters. That's why it's confusing. So what do we have to do as a council? Do we make a motion saying that we want to zap the reserve the way it is? We want to have a separate budget for costs and repairs, and then show the amount that we're actually going to put in the fleet. That's where I'm confused of, and that's sort of what I'm looking for. So I just want to ask you, is that a big project or next year's country?
So I'll maybe just clarify a little bit. So that 6% that you're talking about, that 6% charge is intended to cover the cost, your operation and your maintenance, as well as that replacement cost. So it's that amount that gets charged out to the different departments. But then when fleet itself, the equipment fund, incurs those expenses for your oil changes and all of those kinds of things, they look to see what they charge those other departments, and they compare that to their overall cost. And the way that we budget is to budget for a surplus. So we look at the overall cost of the other departments, and we expect that to be higher than what our oil changes are going to be, and that surplus is intended to be future saving. So when we're budgeting for that 6%, we're budgeting to transfer an amount to the equipment and fleet reserve for a future replacement, but we're also budgeting for those operational costs that occur during the year. If that kind of clarifies.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mayor.
You said it in an accountant form. But what I'm trying to say, as the guy that has to put my hand up, I would sooner see 2 accounts. Operational costs, money that we're actually putting in the reserve. Because in reality, what you're telling me is we could put 6%, I'm thinking, in a reserve to buy all these new trucks. But at the end of the day, we may not have any money left in that reserve because we had to pay more for repair, more for maintenance, more for oil and gas. So when I'm thinking I'm putting 6% in a reserve to buy future equipment, that is not true. It's, you said it, it's what the surplus is. I don't like that formula. I'd sooner say that we're going to put $300,000 a year into that reserve, period. And then the balance goes to repairs. You know, because I could give you 6%, and in 3 years, we could be in a worse position because you spend 7% on maintenance, repairs, insurance, everything else. So that's, I think, why, and that's the uncontrollable part for me as a legislator, that, you know, I'm thinking of giving you 6%. Well, I'm not. Am I even giving you 2 to buy that new piece of equipment? So that's why, and then when you come to budget, I think, well, why would I put 6% in to buy a fire truck that I'm not going to need for 5 years? I can cut that in half and in a couple of years fix it up. And that's why it's all so confusing, because it's just not a fleet reserve. It's a fleet operating account, and if there is a surplus, we put that in the reserve. I think that's the better statement.
Could I comment back?
Go ahead.
Okay. And just to further clarify too, that 6%, that's a 6% increase from the previous budget as well. It's not just a 6% of a number. So when we do the budget, we are budgeting to transfer amounts to save away. So that is something that you do see in the reserve sheet. So it does show a budgeted amount that we're showing to project to put into the reserve. And Robert has, what he does as part of that asset management plan, and I don't want to speak to it, you can speak to it if you'd like, is that he does a projection over time to determine when items are going to be replaced, and that's how we determine if we do a steady 6% increase, we'll be in a situation where we can continue to proactively replace our fleet. Absolutely, there are unforeseen circumstances that occur that can impact that, but we do try to factor those in, say, in the next budget year as well, and where that fleet reserve may be.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Zurkowski.
Do we have a 5-year average or a 3-year average of what it costs to operate our fleet, repairs, fuel, not the replacement?
I don't have one down, but I do have a spreadsheet year by year that does give me a cost, and that's how our rates are figured out. And yeah, the last time we really did an in-depth analysis of it was it was 18, same time as I did this. A lot of our equipment was actually costing us more to operate than the monthly rental rate I was charging for it, because the rates had never been changed or reviewed from 2007. And unfortunately, because we charge, like all pickups right now are a certain rate, $735 a month. If I go to an outside rental company without any expenses, theirs is close to $1,500 a month they'd charge us to rent a pickup right now. So out of that $735 a month, yes, does come my fuel, my services, tires, brakes, all repairs. So whatever's left over goes into the reserve to buy the equipment in the future. We have some vehicles that get a lot of miles on a year, and that $735 is not putting them much into the reserve. But I have other pieces of equipment, pickups, that are in the same class, that the $735 sort of subsidizes those that are putting in more. If we wanted to change the whole system and go by an hourly or mileage use on these vehicles, it gets very complicated. And then it's really hard for the departments themselves to budget an accurate number for the year's usage. A lot of our equipment, like loaders and stuff like that, it's hourly. So it's a little closer because we also compare it to road builders' rates and stuff like that. But we try keeping it lower because we're a non-for-profit business. So we just try keeping the rental rates where we're bringing enough in.
Yeah.
And yes, there are years where we get this doubling of the fuel, which the 6% probably isn't enough. But we're going to have to bite the bullet and suffer and see what next year brings. And hopefully fuel stabilizes, and hopefully the hourly rental, the 6% that we're asking, or the 6% monthly increase, will catch up to that eventually.
I think that's, and I think you sort of alluded to it, so I'm going to pull on that string a bit. I think part of the frustration is when we talk about purchasing vehicles out of the fleet reserve, how does that money get in there? And so I guess this is my question. What is the trepidation about separating operating costs out and then having a fleet reserve to purchase vehicles?
It can be done. It requires a lot of work.
Okay.
A lot of work. So I know where I was before I came here. Yes, my cutting edges were separate. My tires were separate. They were all separate budgets. There was close to 25 different line items for those. And yes, there was a budget on those every year. And then you had the vehicle themselves, that you had so much money going into the reserve. But it requires a lot of work, so it would almost take an additional body or two to almost do that extra work.
I think that's the piece we need to hear more about. We'd like to hear more about is what are the challenges? And then this is the pros and cons. This is why we're going this model, because we're not aware of some of the complications that are involved in taking that piece out and doing it separately. For us at a high level, it's just, what sort of makes sense, but operationally, if it's a nightmare, I think we need to hear more about that sometime.
Yeah, it does become quite a challenge.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Head?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Couple questions. Just to kind of pick up from where the other councillors had left off. Each of these can be tracked, I guess, because we do have unit numbers assigned to each and every vehicle, and I'm sure that when we do, whether we fuel it up or maintenance it, that is logged to that vehicle. So I get there could be some challenges, but that may be a way to move forward to kind of understand what this budget is amount to. And that goes to my next question. You keep mentioning 6%. For the people listening at home, what 6% of what? Would be the first question, I guess.
Well, 6% is on the rental rate. So if I had something that was charged $100 an hour in 2022, For next year, I'm asking for 6% increase on that. So it would go up to $106 an hour.
So when you're asking for an additional 6%, is that which I heard Brianne allude to, a total of 12% potentially, and I will see that in our budget documents, but what does that a percent amount to, each percent, I guess, as well? Do you have a number for that?
I couldn't honestly tell you the dollar amount right off the top of my head.
So we're talking about percentages, I'm just asking 6%, and you kind of clarify what that 6% represents. With an additional 6%, I guess, you know, will we see a dollar amount to that in our budget documents? So maybe a question for then.
City, go ahead.
Well, I can just clarify the last point of that. So you will see it in the budget document. It will assign a dollar amount, and it does talk in depth to the fleet charge as well.
Thank you then.
Thank you. Mayor Dion.
Well, I just want to talk to the accountant again, not the fleet manager that wants to make something difficult. So I understand the fleet. Can we just not have two lines in the fleet? One says operational costs, transfer to the reserve. So that, say every year, say we bring in every year $5 million. And every year we spend 4.5 on maintenance, fuel, and everything else. And we transfer 500,000. Why can't we just show it that way? Operational costs, 4.5. Reserve getting 500,000. So I know then that year I'm putting 500,000 in it. Then if you run into a problem with an overreach, you can't touch my reserve money. You have to come back to council and say, price of gas has doubled, we have a challenge. Because what happens is we leave it, then at the end, it's really not us. So we do cut it sometimes, I admit it, but it could be the costs that eat up the money that we're transferring to reserve too. So I think it's a lot easier than your colleague thinks. You know, we know every year what we get for the fleet. We know an average of what we're spending on maintenance. Granted, it goes up and down, but I think we can round it off. And then when you go to the operational, at the end of the year, we save 300 and some thousand, we're transferring that now to the fleet. But I already know, because see, what concerns me now, I want to shape the fleet as much as we did, because I thought the 6% was going to the fleet purchase, forgetting that it's gas, fuel, tires, insurance. That's why it's confusing. And I'm just trying to make the process simpler and trying to fund it without attacking the other part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Cody.
Yeah, if you'll recall last year at budget time, we were all confused about this issue. Every person was confused. They didn't realize that the operational portion was going into this reserve as well as the reserve to buy purchase equipment. We said at the time we should change it. 12 months later and we're still here. We still haven't changed it. And I think we should have changed it. I don't know why we can't just ask each department to figure out how much obviously they can do it within this department. Just hive it off to the other departments and say, look, that's your budget now to run your piece of equipment and you run your fleet. And then we'd have an actual of what we need to buy a piece of equipment. That's really what we want. And I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, after all, we are in the computer age, I think, or are we? Are we still doing handwork? I don't think so. If we are, let's get some system that can change it, because this isn't working, in my view. It is not working, and I'd really like to change it. And I don't think you can change it for this budget. I know that. I mean, after all, it's made, and that's fine. But I think we should bring in a motion shortly saying, look, for next year's budget, it's going to be changed.
Okay. We do not have a motion on the floor. Councillor Head?
I'll move the recommendation, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. There is a motion on the floor. It is now open for the vote. Councillor Lennox Zepp.
In favor.
Vote is now closed and carried. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda, 7.3, Snow and Ice Control Policy Review. Verbal presentation by Jeff De Silva, the Operations Manager. Go ahead.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and City Council. Thank you for this opportunity to present tonight on our review of the snow and ice control policy. First, I want to note that in the motion on the board, you'll see two items which unfortunately I had missed in my finalization of the policy review and report, so I apologize if there's any confusion that comes about from that. So, back in July, City Council passed a motion requesting that administration bring forward a review of the snow and ice control policy, as well as a review of the clean sidewalk bylaw. So administration has completed this review, taking into account, of course, our best understanding of the conversations back in June and July, as well as some items that we had flagged internally over time throughout our operation. So the report and proposed policy reflects an update to the snow and ice control policy with proposed changes to better reflect our current level of service, but does not propose policy updates that would be expected to result in significant changes to how the roadways operation completes winter maintenance. Our goal with this review was to more accurately reflect the service that the city currently provides in order to provide some better clarity to citizens, to City Council, as well as to operations and our frontline staff on how we address winter maintenance. In particular, our hope is to be able to better stand behind the levels of, or the service levels, particularly with requests for service, in order to better reduce the time that we're spending reviewing and sending crews back for work. The first main item that I'll highlight in my presentation is our definition of the snow storage area. So I know in the past that we've had the communication around potentially using up to 1/3 of a sidewalk as a snow storage item. All that communication had kind of centered around that we would use that as a last case scenario if it was required. Particularly last year, what we found was that by the time we get to that stage in the season where we might use that space, what you have is just a large iceberg of ice that really the graders aren't able to move. So my hope with the change of that definition is to provide some operational flexibility, particularly in areas in the city where it's just not practical to not occupy some of the sidewalk. Of course, we're bringing that forward, understanding that there is, of course, always a trade-off between sidewalk traffic and roadways traffic. So that's something that we're obviously open to consultation on. The next proposed change is to the naming convention that we've used for our snow clearing system, for the priority system, that is. So to date, the numbering system goes through priorities 1 to 4, which often gives the impression to residents that on every snow event, we are going through priorities 1 through 4. When in reality, the last two on that numbering system are areas that are assessed and then dealt with based on the assessment, either done by the Director of Public Works or designate. So it's important to reflect that, to highlight that this isn't proposing a change in level of service to these areas, but rather just to change the convention to avoid confusion. Finally, the last change I'm going to highlight is the change on our chase loaders and windrows. So our policy currently states that a windrow of 12 inches or less would be the responsibility of a homeowner to clear, which, honestly, we don't find that that's a reasonable expectation given the equipment and the way that we operate. We're proposing a 6-inch maximum windrow, as this represents a windrow that a car could drive through. It hopefully would not represent a significant challenge to residents to clear, and it's within our division's ability to meet. Our hope would be that this also gives us a defendable position for calls for service, as this represents one of the most frequent call for service items that we get within the division. So we'd be hoping that we'd be able to better communicate that out and then save the division some time. So that concludes my presentation. I will note that I also have Jeff Soderberg, our roadways manager, here. kind of as backup, if you have some very specific questions.
Thank you. Counselor Zurkowski.
Well, thank you, certainly. Thanks for being here, and certainly, frankly, I think we got the two most important Jeffs in the city over the next 6 months in the room, so pretty exciting. Are we ready? How's your equipment? We ready to go? Yeah? Good.
We're ready.
Yeah, we're ready, he says, thumbs up. Perfect. I have a couple of questions and thoughts, if I may. You touched on the sidewalk, so I appreciate that. To me and to the residents that talk to me, there is no conflict. To them, to the residents, keep the snow off the sidewalk. And the challenge, let me back up. What I've read here that concerns me is on page 178. I'm going to reference it to make sure I've read it correctly. Nope, not that page, 172, sorry. The standard will be for the use of 1/3 of the sidewalks. And I listened carefully to what you said. You talked about the operational challenges. My concern is that will be the standard. That is the goal, and that is the default. I'm uncomfortable with using the default as our practice will be, our goal will be, our standard will be using 1/3 of the sidewalk. I'm more comfortable with what I've observed over the years, Will, where we will use the sidewalk when and where needed, late in the season. And I heard what you say about the ice, put last year aside, but I guess that's my point on the sidewalk. To me, we have a community that walks, we have a lot of seniors that that are still mobile in their homes and they need a safe place to travel. I know I'm not gonna win the argument about keep the snow off the sidewalks, but I think it's wrong to start there. I think it's wrong to use that as a default, to automatically put 1/3 of the snow, to cover 1/3 of the sidewalk. So I'm concerned about that. Did I read that correctly?
So I understand I understand your concern, I think. So our goal isn't to occupy the sidewalks as a first line of defense in our operation. But I think what we were trying to do is highlight that when we come to the point in the season where we're narrowing lanes of traffic, it becomes operationally impossible to now gain that space back.
Yeah.
So effectively it's a policy decision. So at the end of the day, if we wanted to just keep it as we will use it if we can at the end of the season, we could leave it that way. But with the understanding that come, end of February, there would be limited ability for the operation to gain an extra 2 feet of driving lane on roadways.
Okay, and I appreciate your perspective, I do. So
Yeah.
what I've heard is, we will start, as snow accumulates, we'll start rolling the snow up onto 1/3 of the sidewalk, because late in the season, we're gonna need that space.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we would do it on day one. I'm not saying that the snowfall that you would have seen today, had it been something to stick around, that we would be pushing it off of the road onto 1/3 of the sidewalk. But the reality would be, it would become an operational decision as to when we would roll that snow over. So,
And I'm okay with that, but
Yeah.
I don't see that in the policy.
Okay.
What the policy says to me is that's the standard for the using the 1/3 of the sidewalks. So what you just told me, I don't see that language in the policy.
Okay.
And that's what I need help with.
sure, okay.
On page 178, the windrows in the school, I'm going to start with a question to make sure I understand what I've read. On the bottom of 178, school zones will have winter maintenance completed to improve accessibility to traffic while minimizing the creation of windrows. The city over the last 10 years has been absolutely the envy of every other city, because I've heard it from colleagues in other cities, Regina, Saskatoon, and Moose Jaw. that we remove snow in the school zones and do not create windrows. And what I read here is minimizing the creation of windrows. There shouldn't be any windrows in school zones.
Sure.
And so is there a shift going on there that I'm not aware of? Because it took so long. I remember when I first came on, there were windrows and kids were climbing up and dodging buses in school zones. We've gone away with that, and we're proud of that.
Yeah.
Is there a shift going on?
So, no, effectively no. So our hope here was to clarify, because what we had was the priority map showed school zones as being a priority number 2. So there was a bit of an internal conflict in between, getting there as a priority 2 and also coming in to go and do snow lifts. But snow lifts, we're typically trying to get those done on holiday times so that we can get in and get all of the schools in one go and remove all that snow. But we didn't want to leave schools off of the priority 2. So if we ended up with a scenario where we had enough snow where we're trying to manage the passability to actually have people get to the schools, we still want to have that as a priority 2 item.
And I hear what you're saying, and I'm absolutely seeing the operational challenges of getting in there, and it's like, February break is coming, don't worry, Ted, we're gonna do it during February break. Okay, sounds good. But again, that's not the language I see in the policy. It says minimizing the creation of windrows. So that's my concern, is that we're going to go back to creating windrows in school zones. And I'm saying, hell no, it's not gonna happen.
That certainly wasn't our intent. no.
Okay, but that's what it says. So I think that's another one that I think I'd like the department to take a look at. And if there is a shift going on that we're going to go back to create windrows, then we need to have that conversation. So that's why I started with the question.
No, appreciate that.
Okay, on page 179, it talks about rear lanes. Lanes are considered to be the lowest priority and will be conducted on a feasibility need, and we're taking out the feasibility. So there are some positives here, and that's the one I wanted to highlight. We're taking out the word feasibility. It's going to be based on need. So one of the foreshadowing events I have in my mind as we go forward is, I always think of Edie, who lives in West Hill and lives by herself. She's about 78 years old. She parks her white car in the garage. It's always nice and clean, but her garage has back alley access. On her street now, there are no more rear lane garbage pickups. So you know what's going to happen when it snows next Thursday. She's not going to get out of her garage because there's no garbage truck going down the back alley. And so I think we're going to, eyes wide open, as a consequence of that, the consequence, good or bad, is we're going to be in the back alleys more often, and there's going to be a need there. So I wanted to make that a point, because that's going on more and more. We're replacing the big bins to small ones, and in some areas, they're moving to the front. Fine, I get it. But I think, and here's the positive, we're going to assess it based on need, not on feasibility. So I appreciate that. Have I read that correctly?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, and we're generally aware. We know that those changes will lead to differences in how we get calls for service.
Okay. On page 180, and here's a positive for you, going from 12 inches to 6 inches, it's going to be, and again, I think it reflects the practice that's been going on.
Yeah.
But 12 inches going to 6, the department's not fighting that. We want to serve our residents, so I think that's a positive move. Thank you for that. The director will have the discretion to assess complaints regarding windrows left by winter maintenance activities. My concern is, in that process internally, was there a discussion about how quickly that process can happen? To me, why isn't the roadways manager? Because there's lots of levels to filter down, and I know how busy the directors are.
Yeah, I mean, in this document, we use director or designate as kind of an interchangeable. So yeah, obviously the foreman and the manager are the ones who will be out. So they look at, again, depending on the stack of requests for services, it's looked at same day effectively.
I like that. I wrote down here, why not as designate?
Yeah.
But again, it's not reflected in the policy change.
Okay.
And in 17 years from now, when nobody's here, none of us are here, somebody's going to be sitting in this chair and somebody's going to say to the elected, no, it's not in the policy. The director has to approve it. Well, the director's got a meeting, he's not, and we have 6 inches of snow. That's my concern.
Okay.
On page 181, snow ruts will be assessed through the winter maintenance season and will also be on a complaint service request. We've taken out the word complaint. I want to applaud the department. There seems to be a shift on this one away from doing business based on complaints and moving towards doing business based on a decent level of service with what we can afford. I've always struggled with the answer that says, well, don't worry, Ted, we've never had any complaints. To me, that's the wrong measuring stick. And I think taking out the word complaint here and having managers, giving managers the authority to do a good job and giving them the resources to do the job is a better move. And that's the way I interpreted that. Am I correct?
Yeah, and then we saw that last winter is that we were doing a lot of assessment based on the actual conditions on the road.
Right.
Of course, recalls and requests for service also are a good flag because that's a lot more eyes than we have, so.
Right, for sure. And if the residents develop that trust with the department, rather than getting those 472 calls between 7 a.m. and noon, we know they're going to be there. They may not be there within the hour, but will be there by the end of the day or whatever is operationally feasible. On page, or Article 708, snow loading, hauling, and blowing from roads, city-owned parking lots and lanes. I just don't know what that paragraph means when it's talking about snow loading on roadways designated priority 1 and 2 will be initiated in priority order when snow is on the roadway. Snow loading and hauling operations in school zones will be limited to unloading zones. I don't know what that clause means.
So the snow loading, limited to unloading zones, that's the idea that, you know, that's the spot for drop-offs and pickups for schools. So that's, we're identifying that those are the areas that we would be doing snow lifting for schools. On priority 1s and 2s, it's basically just saying when you end up accumulating enough snow in certain areas, once it starts to impede traffic, then that's where we trigger that we get that lifted and loaded out.
Okay, so here's my perspective. When I read this, I thought, is that what this means, that rather than clearing the school zone, we're going to narrow our focus to the drop-off area? That's what this says to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we're going to ignore the 80-meter school zone and just narrow it down to the 12-meter drop-off unloading zone. So that.
No, sorry, I don't mean like exactly just where the buses are
Okay.
as a defined school loading zone, no. So the intent is for drop-off for schools. The drop-off, because we have a lot of school zones where, a lot of school areas where, yeah, the drop-off spills out beyond what's just signed as a dedicated loading zone.
So operationally, what does that mean? So we're gonna go there and do what in those areas?
Jeff, do you have some?
It's gonna be.
You have to go to the mic.
Sorry, Jeff.
I don't, there's no intent to change the status quo the way it has been. The school zones are gonna stay the same. It's not just where the drop-off, like where Jeff was leading to, the drop-off basically is the school zone. So come February break, we'll be doing the whole thing and whatnot.
So again, I'm comfortable with what I'm hearing on the microphone, but I don't see that reflected in the language on 7.08.
Okay.
And that's my concern if you're asking us to pass this today. If you believe in what's here, okay, let me know, but that's not what I'm hearing on the microphone on 708. To me, and was confirmed that we're focusing on the loading and unloading zone within the school zone and that school zone itself. So.
Yeah,
If we
no,
could take
that's
a look
fine.
at that as
I
well.
can.
Okay, thank you. On 7.11, and I see my colleague's eyes, so thank you for your patience. Yeah. Other temporary bans on roadways during parking bans that are declared. What would have to occur? What's the difference in the occurrence between a car being ticketed and or being towed?
with reference to last year, it was kind of, there wasn't really anything set with us anyway. So I think this year is something that we can move forward, and if, I guess, I don't know if it needs to be agreed on or if we can just make the decision, but when no parking signs are up, we ticketed. If it was on a snow lift, we would tow. So I don't know if that's a process we should continue with, or if we should go to the next step and move a little bit farther.
Okay.
But that was our practice last year.
Okay, so what the policy says now, the proposed change, is that during a parking ban, and ban, you're saying not only is it declared ban on priority one, but a ban is also when the city puts out those little signs, right? No parking, okay, so that's a ban.
When signed.
When signed, thank you, I like that. When signed, the cars may be ticketed and or towed. And I'm okay with that conversation, and so are many of my neighbors. But how do we let the public know? How do we know that if Edie doesn't move her car from the front street, that she's gonna get towed, not ticketed? Have we flushed that out yet? How do we know? What's that piece? How do we let the public know, and how do we make that decision? What's the qualifying factors between ticketed or towed?
Well, I mean, effectively, it's been an operational decision. But no, I take your point, that's something that we would want to aim to develop out through the communication plan as this rolls out.
Okay, because if this is defendable, I need to be able to defend that when my neighbor gets towed or ticketed. I have to, and I have to explain that process to them. Right now, or in 3 weeks, when he calls me and says, Ted, is my truck? I'm like, I don't know, but the policy says ticketed or towed. I don't know how that decision was made, but if it's don't have a ticket, your truck's not there, I guess it got towed. So I think that needs to be fleshed out a little bit.
Sure.
Just so we can understand we're all on the same page, so there's no surprises for anybody.
Yeah.
He studied this report. Way to go, Ted.
Well, we're gonna be there in, like, right now. The point, Jeff, you alluded to, I think we need a communication plan.
Yep.
I think we need a communication plan. I'm not ready to support this today. I think I'd like to see it reflective of what we talked about just now with those changes. And on the same evening, have a communications plan that goes with it. I think without a communication plan, this policy is just gonna get us into trouble.
Sure.
I like it, I'm supportive of it, but I think we have to get the message out and remember, some of the hurdles that we've survived and lived through, but get that information out to the public.
For sure.
My last point, there was a great deal of discussion about 22nd Street, both east and west, over the last 6 years. And there was even a motion brought to the floor here about making 22nd Street a priority one roadway. And the roadways manager at the time said, look, we probably don't have the resources to make it a priority one, but when it gets real bad, we will do a lift on 22nd Street East and West. And so my question sounds something like this, rather than regurgitate that whole conversation, because 22nd Street East and West does get narrowed quite often. What's the approach administration's going to have when it becomes very narrow?
We can go with that same process as the past manager was talking about. I know last year was an extreme year, and we did lift quite a bit of 22nd Street.
Yeah.
But as an ongoing thing, we can keep that past practice up.
So it is on the radar.
Yeah.
Lifted east, not west, but that's okay. So it does get pretty narrow in there. So I guess I just need some comfort, because I'm gonna get the calls in a month and a half here.
Right.
Hopefully not, maybe in 4 months, that it's getting narrow. Ted, when are we gonna do a lift? When are we gonna scrape? That administration is open, they're gonna be watching for it. That operationally it's more effective to deal with it rather than make it a priority one.
I would personally prefer to do that,
Okay.
yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zerkowski. Councillor Miller.
Thank you. So I have sidewalk questions as well. So on some of our streets, we don't have sidewalks. And so, but you plow like you do and you don't. So I don't know if the grader operators realize that there is no sidewalks on some streets. And on those streets, could we like move the windrow a little further, like there is no sidewalk? And when we're having snow events, on the snow routes, you know, like I would think that that's a very important street to do. What comes to mind to me is 28th Street, where all the apartments are, and how dangerous that is on the roads to leave some on the sides, because you know, your tires get hooked up into that and you're going to the other way. So I think those are pretty important streets to, I'm gonna say it, ticket and tow, because residents are, you know, they're not speeding. You don't have to speed in order to hit one of those ruts and then go on to the other side of the road. So those are kind of what's important, I would think. And snow events, so this year, are we going to actually call for a snow event when we should? When you should? That one of our residents had asked me that. So.
Yeah, our plan will be to use to declare the snow events when it lines up or when we actually have a good reason to anticipate that there will be a significant snowfall, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Dion.
I'm not going to say I have a question, she'll tell me to get to it. I just want to, before you leave, I still want to congratulate you for what you did last year. 30-year record, and it's a crappy time for us you to do a review. That's like asking you to review the 1 in 500 flood zone. We never know when that's going to come. But I do give you gentlemen and your crews and the city employees credit, because I heard tons of comments all summer long, because I travel all over. I hear horror stories from other cities, and sometimes people have to remember that. When you're blessed with some of the things that we have in our city, when you go to other cities, have a look around, especially when it comes to residential street cleaning. Try going around the residents in other bigger cities than ours and see if you have any luck. They're out there measuring their ruts at 18 inches. And if they're not 18 inches, you're not getting plowed. Well, IKEA, I think, is only 6 inches off the ground, so that doesn't help. So I just wanted to end with a positive. You know, there is some changes here, but I like some of them because they're all to make things better. But at the end of the day, I was very happy with what happened last year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Cody.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys, for the good work. Just a couple of things. One, as you know, some of the streets we have, I have in my area particularly, you know, there's no sidewalks, and there's no driveways, there's no nothing. And they're so damn narrow that you go down one once and it's had it. So, and those poor people, they park on the street. And then they come along and ticket and tow. Here's a guy calls me and he says, you know, I'm on crutches. I can't get out of my house. And he says, I got a ticket. You know, our strategic plan says we are a compassionate city, but we're not. We're not at all. We'll take the last piece of blood out of you if we can, just to get that ticket. And I don't agree with ticket and towing at all. I just think, look if it's that bad, then go and knock on the door and try and help the poor fellow or the poor lady. But you know, you can't, and 90% of the people are good. They'll move their cars, and they do. But there's sometimes they just can't. And so I think if you look at some of the areas, I'm almost convinced you shouldn't even snowplow them, because you know, it is so narrow. McDowell particularly down there is so narrow, people call me and say, what the hell are they doing down here? Now I can't get anywhere. And so, you know, and don't judge by last year. That's not gonna happen again. It's just like the 500-year flood zone. It's not gonna happen. And it won't happen again, thank God anyway, if it doesn't. Jeff, you did a good job there, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Councillor Cody. Councillor Zurkowski.
So I'd like to move that the this come back to the next executive committee meeting with the changes that we've discussed tonight, including a communication plan. And I do want to say again to the staff and the managers in the room, you are guys, you folks are the heroes of the community in the winter. Absolutely. Don't know what you do in the summer, but you're pretty busy in the winter, so thank you for that. Yeah, sincerely though, we do want to give you folks the tools to do your job. We want to give you the tools to provide that level of service that's expected, and that we're all in this together. So when there's stuff that you need, let us know. It's a very important part, and that's what people care about, potholes and snow. So thanks for what you do.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the Jeffs? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll just give the city clerk a few minutes. Thank you. Are we ready to? Okay, we are ready to vote. Councillor Zerkowski, it hits. Okay, thank you. We are now ready to vote. The vote is now open. Councillor Lennox Zepp.
In favor.
The vote carries. Thank you. Okay, that is it for reports of administration. We're now moving on to the unfinished business, 8.1, the landfill cell construction. Do we have a motion on the floor? Or discussion? Go ahead, Mayor.
Okay, and my questions, I'm directing them to the director and the director only, and I want comments from the director. In reading the report, what's surprised me is that we were aware of the cement and the problem that we had prior to issuing the tender. And somebody, not us, made the decision to proceed and award the tender. And then that engineer that was involved, and correct me if I'm wrong, with the tender, helped us with the project. And that's why his price cost inflated. And what I don't understand in reading the report, it says that no one was aware that the cement was moved there because the changing in this, in the foreman or director, whoever ran the landfill, the landfill manager. Okay, did he take all the employees with him? He didn't move the cement by himself. And I'm just amazed, you know, this could happen. And I'm sort of going to tie it to another situation that's similar. Is I walked this weekend, I was bored, so I walked where we're picking up a dirt off Marquis and 15th, and I noticed we were dumping there. And we never agreed to dump any material there because we might want to put a road there or housing, and now we're creating another situation where we're burying something, and I don't know if there's a record of it on what we've dumped in there, so in the future plan that we can go ahead. But maybe just to answer how you made your decision to move ahead with this expenditure without bringing it to council.
Thank you. Go ahead, Director.
Okay, thank you for that question. So first, I want to make it clear that that in no way did we try to deceive the council in this organization. Yeah. Part of the decision-making process on a project like that is that the engineers create a tender package, and they have a unit price for each of the different disciplines of what they're doing, whether it's excavating, moving in gravel, building the roadways, putting in the liner for the landfill cell. So each item is listed in the tender. An estimated volume of that item is listed, and then the contractors bid a price for each volume. In this case, the concrete, we learned of the concrete before the tender was let. And yes, staff at the landfill were included on that discussion when we were at the site, not personally myself, but the team that sits with me today, they were involved. And the engineers who were doing the design, and the foreman out at the landfill, and the previous landfill manager. And always in the major original long-term plan of the landfill, that was the next logical place for the next cell. When they learned that concrete had been dumped into the lower areas to level the space, obviously the previous manager who gave those directions to staff who was doing that kind of work, we learned that they had buried it in the low areas, and that concrete couldn't stay there because it would be in the way of the liner. So the engineers, along with the team, we called in our own crews. We started digging test pits right away so we could estimate the amount of concrete that had been put in the ground. The engineers put that into the tender so that the contractors would bid on concrete removal. So they had an estimated amount of what we thought might be the volume, and then they bid a unit price for that volume. Now, with any unit price contract, which is almost all civil jobs, all road building is like that, our concrete, our asphalt program is like that, our water and sewer program is like that, is that you estimate the volume of what you might be doing, whether it's earthwork or pipe or sidewalk or asphalt. So they estimated that they would be moving X number of cubic meters of concrete based on the holes that they dug to check geotechnically wise how much they thought might be there. There was no record of how much had been buried. And that is a problem, absolutely. Once the tender was let, and we had our contractor, and he starts digging, and he continues to dig, at some point, he reaches what was the estimate, but there's still more to be dug. So in a unit price contract, you always estimate what you think it will be, and if it's 100 units of something, and when you're done the project and it's 90 units, then you pay on 90 units. If it turns out to be 110 units, you pay on 110 units. That's how a unit price contract works. So it was already in the contract, and obviously it went over the 100 units or whatever the actual number was. And but that was after the fact. I mean, it could have been something else. With a landfill situation, is you're dealing with a 50-year-old landfill, and you have a lot of unknowns. If it was like the new yard, it's a green field, so you don't expect to find a bunch of surprises underground. But even at that, with our partners at Signature Development, when you speak with our partners, they exclusively work in a unit-based contract. So everything they're doing out there is a unit-based contract with their own forces and their own companies and their sub-companies. So you might move 100 units, that was your plan, that was the design, and you turn out you move 110. That's the reality. In this case, because it's a landfill, it would have been, in hindsight, very beneficial for us if we had carried a 10% contingency, but I know that council is very concerned about contingencies, and they don't like to see large numbers there. But in civil projects such as this, with the Ministry of Highways, they always carry 10% on all unit price contracts for building any kind of roads. And in this case, with a landfill with 50 years of unknowns, like the concrete wasn't the only unknown that we ran into. It was also the leachate that once exposed, the leachate pipes there were found to be broken and leaking into the grounds. And yeah, I'll stop there. But we had many other surprises that became part of that. So I guess to kind of wrap that up, it was known, it was included in the tender, and the contractor did bid on it, so we did have a price for it. So in that respect, we weren't surprised. We had a price. What we were surprised by is how much the volume of the concrete that was buried.
Okay. Councillor Head.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Director, for those responses. Initially, when this came up, I'll go back a little bit. When we were initially presented this, there wasn't much of a choice. We had to make these adjustments and changes to our landfill, and the ask was $6 million, or at least an estimate of $6 million. And so, moving forward into this build, I do see the project completion now. The changes are, definitely will benefit us here in Prince Albert. But coming back to this motion, an additional of $755,000 was kind of shocking to see, especially because it was already done. It wasn't, these conversations happened prior to it. So I think this email, or this motion to come back to today to ask these questions of the Director was because of that huge ask. Now, I know there were some other issues, and you did come towards council to ask for an additional of a pump and other things to address that. And we thought that this should have been towards City Council again prior to it being approved, I guess. So there was an issue that a lot of this stuff could have been avoided with some potential planning, different planning, I guess. And it just seemed like that, we had all that information to start with this project. So I get you mentioned a manager in here that's no longer employed here. Didn't bring that information forward, and we paid for it. I do want to say one more thing. That when we talked about these policies of contingencies, I think that's what that money was for, at least in my mind, that if there's an overage, that 5% would have been covering that. In this case, it was a lot more than that. And I get that there is an ask to have it higher, but this council decided that 5% was enough because we don't want to see overages in our budget, or at least mitigate some of those asks when we see a large amount like this, $755,000 in addition. So I do thank for your comments and some of the explanation on how we got here. I guess that was the reason why we wanted to ask those questions to you today. So.
And I'll just respond. I too, that's a very concerning number to me. It's not something that I would have taken lightly either. I was very shocked by how much over the concrete was coming in at. We did consult about that, but it's one of those, I guess you call it, it's discovered conditions, and there's no way of stopping. You can't just say, I'll excavate half of the concrete, because the liner has to go in the full width and length and depth to create the sealed cell for the landfill. And any piece of concrete that would have been left in the ground and it punctured the cell, once you start putting garbage on it, would have caused a leachate problem, and then we would have a legacy issue. So I know it's very concerning, and it shocked myself. I mean, we had discussions about what to do, but in a situation like this, it's not a change order because you're not changing, you didn't ask for something new to add to the project or remove from the project because it's unit price. So it's different than the leachate or different than the overburden requests that came in the form of reports to council. And most of the time, like I said, in paving or in our roadways project or water sewer projects, because you're doing, say, 20 different streets, 5 come over budget, 5 come under budget, 5 come on budget, the overall budget is controllable, because if you're running out of money by project number 19, you just don't do number 20 and you stay on budget. In this sense, one cell, there was no way of stopping and saying, well, build half the cell or 3/4 of the cell. It just, a very unfortunate situation, and I don't know how to resolve that. I guess you're right, 5% contingency in this case turned out to not to be enough. 10 would have been a much more sufficient, but that's hindsight.
Thank you for your response.
Thank you, Councillor Head. Mayor Dion.
Well, just a couple comments in rebut. Your department did the right thing when Nicole come and asked us for $250,000 for the electrical that was not in the tender. That was the right thing. When we issued the tenure, sorry, Director, the concrete was not in the tender. You guys added it. It was not in the tender. When it was found, I wouldn't be so upset even if you would have come and said, we got a problem. We want to issue a tenure, but we have a big unknown. We buried concrete. We're finding out 7 months after the fact. That's my upsetting. You talk about contingency. I'm soon going to get rid of that word because you spend it anyway. I'm going to ask for a report from accounting after budget is done on how many projects we've never spent the contingency. We spend it every time. We're into one of our major projects now. We're not even 5%. We got a contingency request because we give them. So we must as well just include that contingency in the price. And thank God we put it at 5%. Or they would have spent 15. If we would have given them 10, they would have spent 15. And I'm so tired of the word, and the word frightens me, and I'm staying away from it. Estimates. Estimates is, just like when I was in the mall business, is the best guess we can give you today. The best guess. And those don't work. Every one we've done. So I am disappointed, and I can't support this motion strictly because under governance, you don't pass a motion to correct something, an error from 5 or 6 months ago. You don't. And I've checked, the bills have been paid, so I'm pleased that the motion is here, so we do know about it, but I won't be supporting it.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Councillor Zurikowski.
Thank you. I understand what the director is saying, and I understand the logistics of it for sure, and probably the right choices were made. It's just the communication piece. Like, I always want to know bad news early. Share the bad news with me first so we can get our heads around it and come up with a strategy moving forward. Because it's always about next time. It's always about next time on the over budget items. How frequent were the invoices coming from the folks that were doing the concrete removal?
So the general contractor was doing all the work. And on all of our CCDC contracts, which is using the Canada standard, they invoice every month. The engineers check those volumes, and then when the engineers agree with the invoice, then city will sign off on them and pay them. We're obligated by the Liens Act of Saskatchewan to pay within 28 days every single invoice, and invoices can be once a month.
Right.
So that's what we were doing. We had an idea that we were going to be over, I would say, towards the middle of January and February, somewhere in there, that we could see that the numbers were coming in high. I had discussions with the city manager of the date, not the present city manager, but the past city manager. And we knew that we needed to bring the number to city council. The problem was that we still didn't have the total cost because we still had deficiencies that were seasonal that couldn't be completed till the following spring, right? We don't have the total picture. So it'd be very difficult for me, as I used the liner as an example, to come to you. I guess the city manager maybe made the choice, but it would be hard for me to come to you and say, we're going to be over, council, but I don't know how much.
That goes over well.
Now we know how much. We have the total.
Can you talk to me about the sanitation improvement fund?
Yes.
What's the purpose of it and what's the balance in it today?
So the sanitation reserve, the improvement fund, is the balance from each year with the City of Prince Albert for the sanitation fund to help recharge or refund the operations. So it's the only fund that is in the black each year. What we have are a set rate that keeps the sanitation fund afloat, right? Versus some of the other ones that are in a negative. So in this case, each year we set aside, we aim for a reserve amount that we can put into the reserve, and that takes care of all the needs for this landfill in the future. For instance, like the cell. So, or new equipment or new buildings or whatever you might need. In this case, we have quite a surplus, and we have even additional surplus coming this year because we've been able to keep expenses down, but revenues are up this year quite a bit, about $250,000 up. So we have, as you see there, or well, it's in the report actually, we're at about $1.7 million in revenue in the fund right now, and we're on track to do better than that. And that just, I checked with finance that we're way ahead this year by about $250,000. And we were budgeting for 800, so potentially, still have a few months to go, one quarter of the year to go, but potentially in around the $1 million mark. But I can't speak to that exactly because there's still some expenses that haven't been, spent yet. But we do have about 1.7 in there to cover the cost of this 755.
Okay. So I'm just going to paraphrase, make sure I understand this. The sanitation improvement fund is in the black, money to cover this expenditure and moving forward. So my next question is, are there any other priorities that will be set aside in order to make this happen?
So actually, no, and you haven't seen the sanitation fund yet. It's coming, but we've been working on it as a team, and we have no asks for the near future except for the replacement of regular sanitation trucks out of the fleet, which is part of the sanitation fleet. But as far as the overall picture of the sanitation, it's incredibly good positioning right now that we've completed the cell. We've got a new kiosk, we have new scales. Everything's been really coming together with them. And we're seeing, we don't have any asks coming in this new fiscal year, and I don't see any in the following year either.
Okay. So this ask today will not result in direct new taxation through our budget cycle that's coming up. We're talking this is coming out of a reserve where there's money in the reserve.
Not only will it not come out of taxation, it will not affect the rates for sanitation that we've set for the next 5 years.
Like that even
It'll
better.
have no impact whatsoever.
Thank you. Great, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? There is not a motion on the floor. Is there someone willing to move the motion? Go
Move
ahead,
to
Mayor.
receive and file.
Councillor Head?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So by receiving and filing, what does that do to this report? Is it the bills don't get paid? They're paid already. Without the approval of that paid, is there any complications with that to the city
Okay,
manager maybe?
just one moment. We have the city manager will answer. Go ahead.
With that motion, basically, it just means that the bills have already been paid. We have to pay the contractor, whether council approves it or not. Basically, what it'll just show is the auditors that it wasn't council didn't approve it. So you'll find that within the audit that comes up at the end for the next year, that it was something that wasn't approved by council.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Zerikowski.
So let's back up the lens a little bit, big picture. The director referred to the Liens Act, which the provincial government recently put into play so that contractors are paid on time. The original concept of that piece of legislation excluded municipalities. And then at the end, we found out it included municipalities. So no matter how potential, put this issue aside, please, how shoddy or how unhappy a municipal government may be with a contractor, the provincial government is saying, doesn't matter, you pay them on time. And that's a problem that's growing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else to add? Seeing none, there is a motion on the floor. We'll move to vote. The vote is now open. Councillor Lennox Zapp?
Opposed.
The vote carries. We have one more item on the agenda. Someone willing to move? Adjournment? Go ahead, Councillor Head.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I move that we adjourn.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. We'll return at 5 minutes to